Her brother appears every day at exactly 4:04 p.m. in the doorway of his old room, the exact minute he ran into traffic, and nothing was the same. Her mother and father see him clearly, a perfect 6-year-old in Power Rangers trunks, smiling, reachable. But Winky sees only blurry static, a human-shaped television tuned to nothing, features flickering into half-recognition before fragmenting again. Outside the window, the lawns of this gated neighborhood are carpeted with bodies, families sleeping on grass, waiting for houses to become available so they can summon their own dead. At dinner, Wenqi's mother doesn't call her name. She calls Tianqis, sets a plate for a boy who hasn't eaten in 8 years. And when Wenqi brings the wrong birthday gift, a paper airplane folded in the shape of Pac-Man, her mother's face closes like a door. Your brother has moved on from Pac-Man. In this house, Wenqi is not the daughter who survived. She is the one who got the gift wrong. That's the world Ai-jiang builds in Linghun, a novella that follows grief's real estate to its last consequence. The setting is a Toronto suburb called Home, where the dead can be summoned if the living pay enough attention, where lingerers camp on lawns for years waiting to bid on haunted houses, and where a teenage girl is dragged into her mother's ritual of summoning a son who died a decade ago. Wenqi's mother has stopped working, stopped gardening, stopped singing, except for the dead boy's favorite song. She needs Wenqi to participate, to sleep in his room, to feed him, to believe. What makes the book hum is not the ghost mechanics, but the question it refuses to answer cleanly. What does a living child owe to a dead sibling she can barely see? Episode 1: Arrival and the Auction. When the van finally stopped, the girl in the back seat didn't open her eyes right away. The drive from Toronto had been 4 hours of stop-and-go nausea, and Wenqi's stomach still felt like it was cresting a hill. The engine cut, and in the new silence, she heard her mother moving inside the house before Wenqi had even unbuckled her seatbelt. She stumbled into a kitchen that looked like a bomb test. Bowls and plates covered every surface. Cupboard doors gaped open, and her mother stood in the middle of it all with a photograph frame in each hand, her gaze skipping from one bare wall to another. Her father stood next to her, one hand rubbing his chin, the other frozen above the sink as if waiting for instructions nobody was going to give. The agent said it might take a while before he appears, her mother said, and her voice had the same tight, fevered quality it had carried ever since she had quit her job, because a new coworker reminded her of the son she had lost. Wenqi already knew what this was. The whole neighborhood was called Home, Homecoming of Missing Entities, and the sign at the gate had explained that families came here to satisfy a longing. That was the polite word. The honest one was grief. The honest one was that Wench's older brother Tianqi had been dead for 8 years, killed at age 6 in a traffic accident, and her mother had never once stopped waiting for him to walk back through a door. Her mother was placing photographs now, Tianqi in a school uniform, Tianqi at the beach, Tianqi holding a plastic dinosaur. She taped them to the walls and propped them on shelves, calling his name in a whisper that was half prayer and half summons. Nothing happened. The house stayed empty. Wenqi moved to the window. Outside, the lawns of Home were not lawns at all, they were carpeted with bodies. Families lay on blankets or sat in folding chairs, their eyes trained on house facades. Across the street, a boy about her age sat cross-legged on the grass, watching her back. A few houses down, an old woman sat in a white chair by her window, clutching a small urn against her chest, her mouth moving silently. Wenqi turned away and found her mother on her knees, scrubbing out a photograph with a wet rag. The image was of Tianqi in Power Rangers swim trunks, a picture Wenqi remembered taking at a community pool years ago. Her mother was trying to clean a smudge off the surface, but the paper was disintegrating. The colors bled, the face dissolved, and by the time she realized what she was doing, the image was nothing but a wet smear in her hands. She collapsed forward and let the tears run down without making a sound. Her father approached slowly. He knelt, produced a slipper from somewhere, and worked it gently onto his wife's bare foot while she clutched the shredded remains. He stroked her fingers, loosening her grip on the pulp. His eyes reddened, but he would not cry. Wenqi knew that bargain. Her mother wept, and her father held, and that was how they had stayed married to the same grief for 8 years. That night, Wenqi lay in her new bedroom and heard the floorboards in Tianqi's room settle under a weight that wasn't there. She thought about the boy across the street, the old woman with the urn, and all the people sleeping on the grass. and for the first time she understood that she had not moved to a neighborhood. She had moved into a wound. The vigil. The next morning, Wenqi tried to make peace the only way she knew how. She found the photograph her mother had destroyed on her phone, reprinted it, and taped it to the living room wall where the original had been. Her mother came downstairs and stopped. She looked at the new copy, clean and whole, and then at Wenqi, and the fury that crossed her face was worse than dismissal. "You want to go home," her mother said, and it wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "This isn't home," Wenqi said. By nightfall, she had been assigned to sleep in Tianqi's bedroom. The logic was that ghosts needed to feel welcomed, and Wenqi's resistance was a locked door. She fought, she screamed, and at some point exhaustion won. She woke in the dark to find herself in his bed, her face wet, the room cold in a way that had nothing to do with the heating. Outside the door, her father sat with his back against the wall. Wenqi could hear him breathing, and then she heard him speak. "I miss you," he whispered. Silence. Then, from inside the room, a voice that was not quite a voice, a crackling, glitching sound, like a radio flipping through stations, finished the sentence. "I miss you too." Wenqi pressed her palm against the door and cried without making any noise at all. Her father had never spoken Tianqi's name since the funeral. He had never said he missed him. He had only ever held her mother's hand and carried the silence. And now the silence had spoken back. The apparition. The next afternoon, at exactly 4:04, Tianqi appeared in the doorway of his room. Wenqi knew the time because her mother had been counting down the minutes. 4:04 was the moment of the accident, the last second before the truck veered, and nothing was the same. Tianqi stood in the threshold with a smile that glitched at the edges, his form resolving and dissolving in waves of static. His voice warbled when he said, "Mei Mei, little sister." Her mother and father saw him clearly, when she could tell by the way they wept and reached for him, by the way their hands stopped just short of touching because they knew they must not. But, to Wenqi, her brother was a blur, a suggestion of a boy, a human-shaped television static that sometimes flickered into half-recognition before fragmenting again. She couldn't see his face. She couldn't remember his face. The ghost stayed until 10:44 that evening, the exact minute of Wenqi's own birth. The symmetry was not lost on her, and it felt less like comfort and more like a perimeter drawn around her life. She had been born into a world that had already lost him, and now she would spend every evening watching her parents love a ghost they could see, while she saw only interference. The classroom rules. The school in Home was a low brick building with a faded sign and a playground that looked decades older than any child who used it. Inside, the hallway smelled of old paper and floor wax, and the students moved with a lethargy that Wenqi initially mistook for exhaustion. Later, she understood it was hopelessness. Most of them had been here for years. Her schedule ended with a 90-minute block labeled HOMEPERIOD. The teacher, Mrs. Junia, rolled her wheelchair to the front of the room and began the lesson as if it were a liturgy the class had recited 100 times. "If we interact with the ghosts, they become stronger and may stay," she said. "If we desire to move on, we must first cut ties with them. Do not touch the ghosts. Do not call their names outside the house. Chano, and leave the lingerers alone." The lingerers were the people on the lawn's families who had not yet secured a house and so could not summon their own dead. They waited, sometimes for years, sleeping in tents or on the bare grass, showering once a month in a communal bathhouse, eating gray sludge delivered by a man in a gas mask. The boy across the street was one of them. Mrs. Juna moved around the room, asking students to share who they were waiting for. A grandmother, a father, a sister. The stories were told in the same flat cadence, as if grief had been rehearsed until it lost its edges. She stopped at Wenqi. "And you? Who are you waiting for?" Wenqi's mouth opened before her brain caught up. "I want to leave," she said. The intakes of breath were audible. Several students turned to stare. Mrs. Junis' expression didn't change, but her pause was long enough to communicate everything. Wenqi had said something unforgivable, and now the whole classroom knew that she did not belong here. At the back of the room, the lingerer boy caught her eye. His lips moved silently, shaping two words that reset the entire day. "Me too." His name, she learned later, was Liam. The persuasion. Liam had been on the lawns of Home for 3 years. That was 1,095 nights of sleeping in a tent, of watching houses fill with other people's ghosts while his own family waited for a vacancy that never came. His parents spent every hour of daylight staring at the front door of the house they wanted, never seeing the people inside, only the occasional hand darting through a doggy door to retrieve groceries. When his parents first noticed Wenqi, they saw an opportunity. The new family had a house, but the daughter looked restless, unhappy, ready to break. If Liam could befriend her, earn her trust, perhaps she would tell them when her family was leaving. Perhaps she could even help them secure the house. Liam's father said it plainly, "You don't have to like her, you just have to be useful to her." Liam didn't argue. He walked to the library, a converted storeroom with a handful of moldy books, and pulled out a volume titled Persuasion, the Art of Convincing and Insisting. He read it in the tent while his parents stared at doors. He wanted to leave Home more than he had ever wanted anything, and if befriending a girl he barely knew was the price of escape, he was willing to pay it. By the end of the week, his family had packed up their tent and moved to a vacant patch of grass directly on Wenqi's front lawn. 3 months passed without a single direct conversation. Wenqi saw him at school, tried to approach him in the library, and he brushed past her with a single whispered sentence, "Not here." She didn't understand the rules yet. The lingerers policed themselves, and any contact between a lingerer and a housed resident was a violation of an unspoken code. Master Brunid, Liam's family had been warned, but the silence couldn't hold forever. On Tianqi's birthday, Wenqi folded a paper airplane in the shape of Pac-Man and presented it at the dinner table. Her mother looked at the drawing and her face went hard. "Your brother has moved on from Pac-Man," she said, and the words landed like a door slamming. Wenqi realized she had drawn the wrong thing. No, she had drawn for the wrong boy, because she could no longer picture Tianqi's face at all. She knew his ghost appeared every night at 4:04, but the static between them was growing, not fading. That same week, the classmate, Penny, invited Liam to dinner. She was a girl whose grandmother's ghost had been growing stronger for months, and she had news. Her family was leaving Home. The house would go to auction. Liam asked if Bakinu, another lingerer, a frantic strategist, would participate, and her silence was its own answer. The auction date was set for 1 month away. When Liam heard, he carried the information back to his parents and told them not to attend. He had his own plan now, and it required something he had never given anyone in Home: direct contact. The window. That night, Liam disobeyed every rule his parents had drilled into him. He walked up to Wenqi's window and knocked. She opened it with a mug of hot chocolate in one hand and a leftover youtiao in the other. The fried dough was still warm, and when she passed it through the gap, Liam's expression flickered with something that looked almost like pain. He had eaten nothing but gray sludge for 3 years, and he bit into the youtiao and closed his eyes. Over the following weeks, the window became their meeting place. Wenqi would heat water and tear open a packet of hot chocolate mix, and Liam would reappear, sometimes at midnight, sometimes at 4 in the morning, whenever his parents' vigil allowed a gap. They talked in fragments. She asked about the old woman across the street who sat with the urn, and Liam told her the woman's mind had gone years ago. She believed she could make the ghosts come. One night, Wenqi asked a harder question. "Who died in your family?" Liam looked at the mug in his hands. "My sister. She was stillborn. Our parents think if we get a house, we can summon her, Trolven." He paused. "What about you?" "My brother," Wenqi said. "He was 6. Nothing else needed to be said. The shared loss sat between them like a third presence, and after that, Wenqi stopped pretending she didn't look forward to his visits. The nights without knocks at the window felt longer. Liam told her about the auction. The classmate's family was moving out in 3 days. He didn't explain what the auction would involve. He just said she needed to see it, and then he ignored her for 2 full days. On the morning of the auction, he appeared in the school hallway, grabbed her elbow, and started walking. Lingerers did not touch housed residents. It was a foundational rule, and the gasps that followed them through the corridor confirmed that Liam had just set fire to the only social contract that protected him. He didn't let go. He pulled Wenqi down the road toward the classmates' house, where a crowd had already gathered, and his jaw was set in a way that told her she was about to see something that would change everything. The auction. The real estate agent's name was Tanya Yemen. She arrived with a snakeskin briefcase and a leopard print hat, rapping a microphone against a podium to quiet the crowd. Rep. Her smile was so wide it looked chemical. I assume everyone here has read the auction instructions and signed the required waivers, she said, and the tone was less question than warning. Don't want any winning bidders to leave empty-handed because they forgot to waive medical and legal liability. Wenqi did not know what that meant. Liam did, and his grip on her elbow tightened. The agent explained the rules. 9 tokens would be released, one at a time, into the crowd. Whoever held a token at the round's end could bid on the house. But the crowd was not a committee, it was a mob, and the final instruction was simple: no weapons. Nothing was said about fists, elbows, knees, or desperation. The first token flew into the air, a small black disc, and the street erupted. Parents, lingerers, and housed residents collided in a mass of swinging arms and trampling feet. A young boy who had been standing near his mother was knocked sideways and disappeared under the crush. Wenqi watched the old woman from across the street, the one with the urn, lunge for a token and take a blow to the head that sent her sprawling into the gutter. She didn't get up. Wenqi dropped to her knees. Her lungs had stopped working. Liam stood beside her, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the violence as if forcing himself to witness every second of it. He had seen a video of the auction days ago, but he hadn't told Wenqi. He hadn't warned her. His silence now felt like its own kind of crime. The first round ended with a man stumbling away, token in hand, his nose flattened and one ear torn. The second round was bloodier. By the third, the street was slick. The auctioneer's voice over the microphone never wavered. The lingerer Bakanu had a plan. Because the auction, he had organized a coalition of the weakest lingerers, the elderly, the sick. The parents with infants and his sister had agreed to help him win tokens so they could bid as a block and finally secure a house. The problem was that his ambition outstripped his body, and by the 7th round he had pushed his sister back into the fray even though she was staggering. The 9th token was the last. He lunged for it, but his arm snapped audibly, a wet crack that cut through the noise, and he went down screaming. His sister, who had already withdrawn, saw him fall and ran back into the crowd. She reached him, she shielded him, and then she misjudged the angle of a body hurtling past and staggered backward onto the sharpened end of a broken tree branch that had been planted as a garden stake 3 years ago and never removed. Check! It entered her neck. She didn't scream. She made a sound that was barely a cough, and then she collapsed. The strategist caught the token flung by someone, snatched from the air just as she hit the ground. He won the right to bid, but his sister was dead before the auctioneer could announce the round's end. The agent looked at the body, adjusted her hat, and said, "Well, that wasn't supposed to happen." Her nervous laugh was the worst sound Wenqi had ever heard. The crowd began to disperse, some clutching tokens, others clutching injuries. Wenqi stayed on her knees. Liam didn't move. He had brought her here to show her what HOME really was, and now they were both standing inside the truth. This place didn't honor the dead, it fed on the living. And the only thing worse than being trapped here was learning that you had become part of the mechanism that trapped everyone else. And Liam had used Wenqi. He had befriended her at his parents' instruction, read a book about persuasion, and placed himself on her lawn like a chess piece. He had planned to earn her trust and leverage it for a house. And now, standing over Penny's body, he realized that he was no different from Bakinu, who had pushed his sister into a fight that killed her because winning mattered more than surviving. Wenqi didn't know that yet, not in full. She only knew that Liam had gripped her elbow and brought her here, that the classmate was dead, and that the look on Liam's face was not horror but guilt aimed inward at something she couldn't yet name. They walked home in silence. The lawns of HOME, once just strange, now looked like a killing field in waiting. The window where they had shared hot chocolate and Yutiao was dark. Wenqi climbed through and didn't look back. Liam stood on the grass, his parents still staring at the door they wanted, and he understood for the first time that escape might not be a destination. It might just be a different kind of grief, one that didn't kill you but also never let you go. Episode 2, Escape, Loss, and Inheritance. The night after the auction, I couldn't sleep. Penny's body kept appearing behind my eyelids, the branch, the silence, Tanya Yemen adjusting her hat. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the wet crack of Balkanus's arm and saw his face when he realized his sister was dead and he was still holding the token. Sometime past midnight, I gave up and crept downstairs for water. The house was silent. Tianqi's door was closed. Out the kitchen window, I could see the lawn, the pale humps of tents and sleeping bags, the orange glow of someone's dying campfire. That's when I heard the voices. They came from the side of the house, near the garden shed. Two figures, hunched and urgent. I pressed against the wall and listened. You have to try harder. A man's voice, thin with desperation. She's been inside the house. She knows the layout. If the family leaves, I know what she knows. This voice I recognized. Liam. But it wasn't the Liam who knocked on my window with hot chocolate on his breath and grief in his eyes. This voice was flat, exhausted, a door closing. I've done everything you asked. I moved to her lawn. I talked to her. She trusts me. Then use it, the woman said. His mother. The auction showed what happens when you wait. Penny is dead. Bakinu won, but at what cost? We can't wait for another auction. We need a house before someone else takes it. Before we, what? Liam's voice cracked. Get tired? Get old? Die on this lawn waiting for a ghost that might not even exist? A pause. I don't want to see my sister. I never did. I told you that. I just want to leave. And you will, his father said. Once we have the house. Just find out if her family is leaving. Find out when. That's all we need. The silence that followed was long enough to curdle milk. Then Liam said, so quiet I almost missed it, "I'll ask her." I didn't wait to hear more. I walked back upstairs, placed each foot carefully on the creaking steps, and sat on my bed with my hands folded in my lap. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there and let the knowledge settle into my bones like cold water finding its level. Liam had never been my friend. He had been a project. A persuasion. A chess piece his parents moved across my lawn. The hot chocolate, the youtiao, the midnight confessions about dead siblings, all of it was scripted. I had told him my brother was dead, and he had stored that information like currency. For Chastus, when the knock came at my window an hour later, I didn't move. It came again, harder, then a third time. I walked to the window, drew back the curtain, and looked at him. Liam's face was pale in the moonlight. He held up a packet of hot chocolate mix had somehow acquired stolen. Traded, I didn't care. His lips moved. Please. I opened the window. Not because I forgave him, because I wanted him to see my face when I ended this. You used me, I said. He flinched. Wenqi, your parents told you to befriend me. You read a book called Persuasion. You moved your tent to my lawn like I was a house you were trying to buy. I said it all flat, like reading a grocery list. Did you practice? The UTL, the story about your sister, was any of it real? My sister is real. His voice was raw. That part was always real, but the rest wasn't. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, the hot chocolate packet crumpling in his fist, his mouth opening and closing around words that wouldn't form. I thought you were the only person in HOME who understood, I said, but you weren't a person. You were a plan, and I was the target. Wenqi, please, I was going to tell you when. After my parents sold the house, after your family moved in and summoned your sister and you didn't need me anymore, I leaned forward and my voice dropped to something I barely recognized. You let me believe we were the same. You let me tell you about Tianqi. And the whole time, you were just waiting for me to be useful. I closed the window, I drew the curtain. I stood there in the dark until I heard his footsteps retreat across the grass. And then I sat down on the floor and pressed my forehead to my knees. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was that some small, stupid part of me still wanted to open the window again. The intruder. The old woman across the street had a name now, though I didn't learn it until much later. For the moment, she was still just the neighbor, the one with the urn, the one who muttered to herself at the edge of the road, the one who'd been knocked down at the auction and had gotten back up and kept fighting for a token she never won. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that she had been watching our house with a different kind of hunger, not for the dead. For proof, Mrs. Linghun-ai-jiang had lived in HOME longer than anyone. Her house was the only one in the neighborhood that had never produced a ghost. She had tried everything: photographs, vigils, rituals, pleas. She had washed the blood from her husband's wool coat 40 years ago and kept it hanging in her closet ever since, waiting for him to return and need it. He never came. The house remained silent. And Huijia, let's call her by her name now, since this is where her story begins to intersect with mine. Huijia had concluded that the problem wasn't her. It was the house, so she found another house, ours. She arrived on a Tuesday morning in gardening clothes, carrying a trowel and a plastic bucket. My mother answered the door, exhausted and suspicious, but Huijia's English was broken and gentle, and she offered to weed the flower beds for free. She just wanted something to do, she said, something useful. My mother, who had not slept properly in weeks and could not keep up with the house, agreed. Huijia worked in the garden for 2 hours. She pulled dandelions, she trimmed the hedges, and then, when my mother went to the bathroom, she slipped inside the house. The kitchen was dark, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. Huijia moved slowly, her breath shallow, her eyes adjusting. She had spent 40 years in a house that gave her nothing, and now she was standing inside a house that had produced a ghost in less than a week. The unfairness of it was a physical pressure in her chest. She heard the sound before she saw it, a soft tap, a rustle, then footsteps, small, quick, the footsteps of a child running across the upstairs landing. Huijia looked up. At the top of the stairs, half visible in the shadows, stood a figure. A man, she thought, tall, broad-shouldered, the shape of someone she had been waiting to see for 4 decades. She could not make out his face, but she didn't need to. She knew who it was. She had been calling him for 40 years. She opened her mouth and screamed her husband's name, the name she had been calling for 4 decades, the same name that belonged, impossibly, to the boy sleeping on our lawn. Liam, the figure didn't move. The light shifted, and for a moment Huijia saw it more clearly, smaller than she had thought, younger, a child silhouette. But then my mother was running into the room, her hands grabbing Huijia's shoulders, her voice rising into something between a shriek and a curse. What are you doing? Get out. Get out of my house. Huijia stumbled backward, still staring at the stairs. The figure was gone, the landing was empty, but she had seen it. She was certain. After 40 years, she had finally seen a ghost, and it had been inside someone else's home. My mother shoved her out the front door. Huijia landed on the grass, trowel still in her hand, and lay there for a long moment staring up at the sky. We had it. Then she stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked back across the street to her own silent house. She did not know that what she had seen was not her husband, but my brother Tianqi. She did not know that the name she had screamed Liam was also the name of the boy sleeping on our lawn. She only knew that the house across the street was haunted, and that after 40 years of nothing, she had proof that the dead could be reached. Just not in her house. Not yet. Because I'm alive. The confrontation with my mother had been building since the day we moved into HOME. Every photograph she placed, every meal she set out for a son who couldn't eat, every time she looked at me and saw only the space where Tianqi should have been, it had all been stacking up like kindling. I just needed a match. The match was dinner. My father was working late, as he always did, because someone had to earn money, and my mother had stopped caring about anything that didn't involve Tianqi's ghost. She stood at the table holding a plate of steamed fish, her hair a mess, her slipper tapping against the tile. When she heard my footsteps, she whirled around with a smile. Tianqi? The smile died when she saw me. Where is your brother? Her voice was quiet, but the quiet was worse than the screaming. It was the quiet of a door being locked. I tried, I said. He won't come down. Try harder. She slammed the plate onto the table. The fish's dead eye stared up at me. He's your brother. He needs you. This family needs you too. This family needs him. The words came out before I could stop them. This family has always needed him, and I'm just the one who's still here, so I'm the one who has to do everything, and it's never enough because I'm not him. I'm never going to be him. My mother's face went very still. Go to his room. Bring him down for dinner. No. The word hung in the air between us. Then my mother moved, and I moved, and we were suddenly in each other's space, her hands on my arms, my back against the wall. Go, she screamed. Go to your brother. I shoved her off me. She stumbled, caught herself on the table, and stared at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not grief, but something closer to horror. As if she was seeing me for the first time. As if she had just realized that I was not an extension of Tianqi, not a substitute for Tianqi, not a servant to Tianqi's memory. I was a separate person, alive and furious, and I was done. I walked upstairs. My mother called after me, but I didn't stop. I walked to Tianqi's door, and I kicked it hard. The wood shuddered. The lights in the hallway flickered. Come out, I screamed at the door. Come out and be her son. Because I can't do it anymore. I can't be you and me at the same time. Silence. Then a single knock from inside the room. Tianka's knock. The one that meant he was there, he was listening, he was scared. I didn't answer it. I walked back downstairs, past my mother, into the living room. The fireplace was lit. My father always lit it before he left for work, a small comfort against the damp. Above the mantel hung our family portrait. Mother, my father, Tianqi at 6 years old, and me at 8. The last photo taken before he died. The only one where we all looked happy. I took it off the wall. My mother saw what I was holding and lunged. "No, put that down, Wenqi." I threw it into the fire. The glass shattered against the logs. The frame caught immediately, the wood curling and blackening. The photograph itself took longer, the heat making the paper buckle, the colors warping, our faces distorting one by one. Mother, my father, me, and then Tianqi, his smile twisting into something unrecognizable before the flames consumed it entirely. My mother screamed. She didn't scream words, just sound raw and animal, the kind of noise a body makes when something inside it breaks. She reached into the fire. I grabbed her wrist. "Stop!" She shook me off and closed her hand around the burning photograph. The smell hit me before the sight did. Singed skin, burning paper, the chemical reek of melting emulsion. She pulled the remains out of the fire and clutched them to her chest, her fingers red and blistering, her face wet with tears and sweat. "Why?" she whispered. She was looking at me, but I don't think she was seeing me. I don't think she had seen me in 8 years. "Why would you do this?" "Because I'm alive." The words came out louder than I intended, louder and steadier and more true than anything I had ever said. "I'm alive, and you've spent 8 years wishing I was him. You moved us to a neighborhood full of dead people because you couldn't stand to look at the one child you still had. You talk to a ghost, you cook for a ghost, you burn your hands for a ghost, and I'm standing right here. I've been standing right here the whole time, and you've never once seen me." My mother stared at the charred photograph in her hands. The edges were still glowing. Her fingers were trembling. When she looked up, her eyes were empty. "You killed him," she said. "You killed him again." I left her there on the floor. I walked upstairs to my room, not Tianka's room, mine, and I closed the door. I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat on my bed and pressed my palms against my thighs and breathed until the trembling stopped. I had burned the family portrait. I had screamed the truth at my mother. And somehow, impossibly, I felt lighter than I had in years. The widow's wall. Across the street, Hui-Jia was burning things too. She had received a letter that morning. A single sheet of paper, no stamp, slid under her door. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message was 6 words: "Stay away from our home." Hui-Jia knew who had sent it. The woman across the street, the one who had thrown her out of the house, the mother. Hui-Jia folded the letter and set it on her kitchen table, then walked to the closet where her husband's wool coat still hung. She pressed her face into the fabric and inhaled. The blood had been washed out 40 years ago, but she swore she could still smell it, copper and salt and the faint, faded scent of him. Then she went to her photo albums. She had hundreds of photographs. Wedding photos, vacation photos, blurry snapshots of her husband, mid-laugh, mid-bite, mid-sentence. She had spent decades arranging and rearranging them, trying to find the one that would call him back. None of them had worked, so now she would try something else. She took a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer and began to cut. Snip. Her husband's face separated from her own. Snip. His body, removed from the beach, from the garden, from the steps of their first house. Snip, snip, snip. She cut him out of every photograph in the album, and when she was done, she held a pile of paper ghosts, her husband in fragments, a mosaic of a man she was trying to resurrect. She ordered glue, she ordered paint, she ordered brushes. When the supplies arrived, she pushed her furniture against the walls and painted the entire living room black. The walls, the floor, the fireplace, mantel, everything. Then she began to paste the photographs onto the largest wall. Her husband emerged in pieces. Here, his eyes. There, his hands. His smile, repeated across the black surface like a chant. She arranged and rearranged, trying to make the fragments cohere into something that felt like him. It didn't. The photographs were just photographs. The wall was just a wall. So she began to paint. She had been an artist once before her marriage, before she left Fuzhou and everything she knew. She hadn't painted in 50 years, but her hands remembered. She mixed the colors on a palette, the particular brown of his eyes, the shade of his skin in summer, the gray at his temples in the years before he died, and she began to fill in the gaps between the photographs. A shoulder here, a jawline there, the curve of his ear, the hollow of his throat. She worked for days. She barely ate, she barely slept. The wall consumed her, and she let it. This was the closest she had been to him in 40 years. Not his ghost, not yet, but his image, emerging from the black like a swimmer breaking the surface. On the third night, she heard it. A whisper, faint, barely audible, coming from the wall. Liam. She froze, brush in hand, paint dripping onto the floor. The whisper came again. Leave him. She wasn't sure if it was her husband's voice or her own mind or something else entirely. She only knew that the wall was speaking, and after 40 years of silence, any voice was a miracle. The next morning, Tanya Yemen knocked on her door. The real estate agent wore the same leopard print hat shed worn to the auction, though the feathers had been replaced. Her smile was still chemical white. "Mrs. Linghun-ai-jiang," she said, holding up a translation device the size of a deck of cards. "May I come in?" Huijia stepped aside. Tanya walked through the dark house, past the black walls and the scattered photographs, and stopped in front of the painted wall. She studied it for a long moment, the fragmented face, the half-finished shoulders, the whisper Huijia could still hear echoing in her skull. "You've been busy," Tanya said. The translation device rendered her words into flat, robotic Mandarin. "Why are you here?" Huijia asked. The real estate agent didn't turn around. "I knew your husband, Liam, 7. She paused. "I knew him very well." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack the floorboards. Huijia stared at the back of the woman's head, the perfectly styled hair, the sharp collar, the person who had stood over Penny's body and laughed, and she understood, in that moment, exactly what Tanya was telling her. "He never mentioned you," Huijia said. "He wouldn't have." Tanya turned, and her smile had shifted into something almost gentle, almost pitying. "He loved you, in his way, but you never really understood him, did you? His work, his mind, his world. You were his quiet wife, his dutiful wife. But I was the one who could talk to him. I was the one who knew what he was thinking before he said it." She tilted her head. "When he was dying, he talked about you. He said you would wait forever. He said that was the problem." Hujia's hands were shaking. "Get out." Tanya nodded, as if she'd expected this. "Of course." She walked to the door, then paused. "The house across the street? The one you broke into? The ghost they have is a child, Mrs. Ling, a 6-year-old boy, not your husband." "Your husband never came back. I'm sorry." She left. The door clicked shut. Huijia stood alone in her black room, surrounded by the fragments of a man she had spent 40 years waiting for, and she understood something she had been refusing to understand since the day he died. He wasn't coming. He had never been coming. And the woman who had visited her today, the woman who had known him in ways Huijia never could, was proof that the life she had built around his absence was a life built on sand. She picked up her brush and continued painting. The robot's voice. For days after the fire, I avoided Tianqi's room. I avoided my mother, who had taken to sitting in the living room with her bandaged hands folded in her lap, staring at the empty space above the mantel. I avoided the window, where Liam still appeared some nights, knocking softly, waiting for me to open the curtain. I never did. But I couldn't avoid Tianqi forever. It was late, past midnight, when I found myself sitting outside his door. I didn't plan to go there. My feet just carried me, the way they always did when I couldn't sleep, when the house was too quiet or too loud or too full of the wrong kind of silence. "Jigi," I said. "Brother." The word felt strange in my mouth. I hadn't called him that since the day he died. "I'm sorry I kicked your door. I'm sorry I screamed at you. It's not your fault." "None of this is your fault." Silence. Then the sound of something small and mechanical being pushed under the door. I looked down. It was Tianqi's robot, a toy from years ago, the kind that recorded a message and played it back in a tinny, distorted voice. He had loved this thing when he was alive. He used to follow me around the house with it, pressing the button over and over, giggling every time it repeated his words back at him. I picked it up. It was dusty, the plastic yellowed with age. I pressed the play button. Static. Then a voice. Tianka's voice. "It's okay, Mei Mei, little sister." He had called me that when he was alive. He had recorded this message when, before he died, after, the ghost could not speak. Everyone said so. The ghosts were silent, present but unreachable, images without voices. And yet, "It's okay, Mei Mei." I pressed the button again, and again, and again, each time, the same words in the same tinny voice, and each time I felt something inside me unclench. Tianqi wasn't angry. Tianqi wasn't trapped. Tianqi, somehow, was still my brother, and he was telling me the one thing no one else in this house had ever thought to say: "It's okay." Sat outside his door until dawn, the robot clutched in my hands, and I cried for the first time since the auction. Not the dry, gasping sobs of fury. Real tears, the kind that leave you hollowed out and clean. The apology. I found Liam at the edge of the lawns, near the road that led out of HOME. He was sitting on an overturned crate, staring at the asphalt as if he could will it to carry him somewhere else. "I know about your parents," I said. He didn't look up. "I know you do. The hot chocolate, the youtiao, the stories about your sister. Was any of it real?" He turned then, and his face was so tired it hurt to look at. "My sister was real. Everything I told you about her was real. And the hot chocolate," he laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Wenqi, I hadn't eaten real food in 3 years. You handed me a piece of fried dough and I almost cried. That wasn't part of the plan. That was never part of the plan. But the plan existed. Yes, he met my eyes. My parents told me to befriend you. They told me to use you to get a house. I said yes. I read a book about persuasion, and I moved my tent to your lawn, and I waited for the right moment to make you trust me." He paused. "And then I actually met you, and you were the first person in 3 years who looked at me like I was a person instead of a tool, and I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't say anything. I was going to tell you," he said, "after the auction. I was going to tell you everything and let you decide. But then Penny died, and you looked at me like I was a monster, and I realized I had been a monster. I had done exactly what my parents asked. I had used you. And I'm sorry." The word hung in the air. Sorry. Such a small word for such a large thing. "My brother spoke to me," I said. Liam blinked. "What?" "Last night, through a toy robot. He said it's okay, Mei Mei, his first words since he died." I looked down at my hands. I burned our family portrait. I screamed at my mother that I was alive. And Tianqi told me it was okay. Liam was very still. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to leave HOME." I said it out loud for the first time, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff. "When I graduate, I'm going to pack my things and get in a car and drive away from this place. And I'm never coming back." Liam stood up. He took a step toward me, then stopped, as if remembering all the rules had broken. "Can I come with you?" I looked at him, this boy who had used me, who had lied to me, who had stood beside me while Penny died, and who had knocked on my window night after night with hot chocolate and loneliness and a grief that mirrored my own. He was the only person in HOME who had ever wanted to leave as badly as I did. He was the only person who understood. I reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold and thin, the fingers of someone who had been sleeping on grass for 3 years. He stared at our joined hands as if had never seen anything like them. "You touched me," he said. "Is that okay?" "I don't know." His voice cracked. "No one's touched me in 3 years. Not really, not like this." He closed his eyes. "Can we leave tonight?" "After graduation," I said. "We need diplomas. We need jobs. We need a plan. We have 2 months. Then we wait 2 months." He nodded. His hand tightened around mine. We stood there in the gray light of early morning, two kids on the edge of a neighborhood full of ghosts, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I had something to look forward to. The escape. Graduation day was gray and drizzling. The ceremony was held in the school gymnasium, which smelled of floor wax and mildew and the particular despair of an institution that had been teaching dead-end lessons to dead-end students for decades. I walked across the stage in a rented gown and received a diploma that meant nothing to anyone in HOME. My father clapped. He was the only one from my family who attended. My mother had refused to leave the house. Someone needs to be here for Tianqi, and I had stopped expecting her to show up for me years ago. After the ceremony, my father hugged me. It was brief and awkward, the kind of hug exchanged by people who had forgotten how to touch each other. "I'm proud of you," he said, and I could tell he meant it, and I could tell it cost him something to say. My mother's grief had consumed so much of our family that there was almost nothing left for moments like this. "Thank you," I said. "Tell mother I said goodbye." He didn't ask where I was going. He already knew. Liam was waiting by the car. It wasn't much a 10-year-old sedan had bought with money saved from odd jobs around the neighborhood, but it ran, and it had a full tank of gas, and it was pointed away from HOME. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." We loaded our belongings into the trunk. Most of it was mine. Liam owned almost nothing. A few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a photograph of his sister had kept hidden from his parents. We didn't say goodbye to anyone. There was no one left to say goodbye to. Liam's parents were asleep on the lawn when we drove past. I watched them in the side mirror, two motionless shapes huddled under a thin blanket, and I wondered if they would still be there when we came back. If we ever came back, if there was anything left to come back to. We drove in silence for the first hour. The houses thinned out, then disappeared entirely. The road widened. The sky opened up. And then, without warning, Liam's phone lit up. He stared at it like it was a bomb. "I have service. How long has it been?" 3 years. His voice was barely a whisper. 3 years without a single message, without a single call. And now he picked up the phone and looked at the screen. The notifications were flooding in. Texts from old friends who had given up on him, emails from before his family moved, a weather alert from a city he hadn't thought about in years. The world had kept spinning. His life had been paused for 3 years, and now it was unpausing all at once. We drove until the sun came up. By morning, we had crossed into a different province. By evening, we had found a motel. By the end of the week, we had rented an apartment in Toronto, a cramped one-bedroom with thin walls and a radiator that clanked all night, and windows that looked out onto a street full of living, breathing, unhaunted people. I got a job at a bookstore. Liam got a job at a warehouse. We learned to cook. We learned to grocery shop. We learned to exist in a world where the dead stayed dead and the living didn't have to fight for houses. It was hard, and it was lonely, and it was the most alive I had ever felt. And then Liam started coughing. The diagnosis. It was a dry cough at first, the kind that comes with a cold or allergies or too much dust in a warehouse. Liam ignored it. I ignored it. We were young, we were free, we were building a life. A cough was nothing, but the cough didn't go away. It got worse, deeper, wetter. Liam started losing weight, not the healthy kind, not the we're eating better now kind. His face hollowed out. His skin went pale. He started sleeping 12, 14 hours a day and waking up exhausted. I made him see a doctor. The doctor ordered tests. The tests came back. Stage IV lung cancer. Metastasized, inoperable, 10 to 12 months, maybe less. I remember the doctor saying the words, and I remember Liam nodding as if had expected this, and I remember walking out of the hospital into a bright, cold afternoon that had no right to be so beautiful when the world was ending. But what I remember most is the silence in the car on the drive home. The silence that meant Liam had known. He had been coughing for months, hiding it as best he could, because he didn't want to ruin what we had. He didn't want to be a burden. He didn't want to be another person I had to grieve. "When did you find out?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Liam, when?" "Before we left HOME. His voice was hoarse. "I found out a week before graduation. I didn't tell you because..." "Because what?" "Because you would have stayed." He turned to look at me, and his eyes were wet. "You would have stayed in HOME to take care of me. And I couldn't let you do that. I couldn't let that place have you. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to tell him that he had lied to me again, that he had let me build a life with him knowing he was dying, that he had made me love him and then doomed me to lose him. But all I could do was sit in the passenger seat and watch the city blur past the window and think about the shadow I had seen on the drive home. A tall figure walking alongside a child clutching a robot to its chest. Then I had blinked and it was gone, but I knew what I had seen. Liam's ghost, Tianqi's ghost, walking together, waiting for me to join them. Liam. The ashes. Liam died on a Tuesday. It was raining. He was in our apartment, in our bed, with my hand in his and the window cracked open so he could hear the city outside. He didn't say any last words. He just stopped breathing right around 4 in the afternoon, and I sat with him for a long time afterward, watching the rain streak down the glass. We had been given 10 months, but we got 8. I had him cremated. I didn't know what else to do. His parents were still in HOME, still waiting for a house that would never be theirs, and I couldn't bring myself to contact them. What would I say? Your son is dead. I'm sorry. He loved me, and I loved him, and none of it was enough. A week after the cremation, a letter arrived. It was from a lawyer in HOME, and it contained 2 things, a will and a handwritten note. The will was from Mrs. Linghun-ai-jiang. She had died 2 months ago. I hadn't known. I hadn't been keeping track, and she had left me her house, the house across the street from my parents. The only unhaunted house in HOME. The note was from her, too. It was written in shaky English, the letters cramped and uneven. You remind me of me sometimes. I hope you don't wait as long as I did. The house is called Linghun. It means spirit. I hope you find what you're looking for. I drove back to HOME alone. The lawns looked the same. My parents' house looked the same. Liam's parents were still there, still asleep on the grass, still waiting. I didn't wake them. I unlocked the door of the old woman's house and stepped inside. The living room was black. The walls, the floor, the fireplace mantel, all covered in dark paint, and against the largest wall, a portrait of a man assembled from photographs and brushstrokes, half finished and fading, his face looking down at me with an expression I couldn't read. In the corner of the room sat a suitcase. I opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Chinese, dating back to the 1950s. Letters from Fuzhou. Letters from a woman who had left her home and her family to marry a man she barely knew. A man who had died too young and left her alone in a country where she didn't speak the language. Letters she had never sent because there was no one left to send them to. I read them all. I read about her loneliness, her grief, her 40-year vigil in a house that refused to give her what she wanted. I read about the gardener's job she took to get into my house and the ghost she thought she saw on the stairs. I read about Tanya Yeeman's visit and the betrayal that had cracked something essential inside her. I read her final letter, the one she had written just before she died, in which she said that she had finally understood something. The dead don't come back. Not really. We bring them back ourselves, piece by piece, and we call that haunting. But it's just memory. It's just love with nowhere to go. I closed the suitcase, I opened the urn of Liam's ashes, and I scattered them across the black floor of the house Huijia had left me, where they mixed with the dust and the paint flakes and the burnt edges of her photographs. Then I left the door open, not for ghosts, for anyone who needed to come inside. The lawn. I didn't go into my parents' house. I sat on the lawn instead, cross-legged, facing the window where Tianqi's ghost appeared every evening at 4:04. The grass was cold and damp. The sun was going down. I could see my mother's silhouette in the kitchen, moving slowly, setting out a plate of food for a son who would never eat it. At 4:04 exactly, the lights flickered. The window brightened, and there he was, Tianqi, my brother, his face clear for the first time since he died. Not static, not blur. Him. He looked at me through the glass, and I looked back at him, and for a long moment neither of us moved. Then another figure appeared behind him, taller, broader, a man's shape, half-formed but recognizable. It wasn't Huijia's husband. It wasn't anyone I had expected to see. It was just a spirit, patient and still, standing beside my brother like it had been waiting for me to notice it. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know why it was there. But I sat on the lawn and watched the 2 ghosts move through the house together, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Liam died. Peace, or something close to it. When I looked down at the grass between my feet, I saw a sprout pushing up through the dirt. Small, green, alive. I didn't move. I didn't go inside. I just sat there on the lawn of my parents' house and waited, the way Huijia had waited, the way Liam's parents were still waiting. But I wasn't waiting for the dead to come back. I was waiting to see what would grow. The sprout shivered in the evening breeze. The ghosts moved through the window, and I stayed, a lingerer at last, learning what Huijia had learned, that grief doesn't end. It just changes shape. It just keeps growing, like something planted, like something that wants to live. Wenqi ends the story sitting on a lawn she once fled, watching two spirits move behind a window. She has scattered ashes in an unhaunted house, read 40 years of letters, and chosen for the first time in her life where to sit. Not the house, not the road out, the lawn, the space between staying and leaving. And at her feet, a sprout pushes through dead leaves. Ai-jiang doesn't tell us what it means. She just notices it. That restraint is the book's final discipline, and it's worth pausing on because Linghun is a horror novel that refuses to resolve its central question. What are the living supposed to do with the dead? Not how to grieve, not how to heal. Just what do you do, practically, when someone you love is gone and won't come back, and you have to keep waking up anyway? Zhang has been direct about this in interviews. She describes grief not as a passive sadness, but as something that consumes, chews, swallows, creating a staticness where the living become ghosts in their own lives before they've actually died. The mechanism of HOME, the dead, appear because the living refuse to move, and the living refuse to move because the dead appear is a literalization of that trap. But the horror, she insists, isn't the ghosts. It's the hunger of the people who summon them. This is a useful reversal, because most ghost stories train the audience to fear the dead. Linghun trains you to fear the living specifically, what the living will sacrifice to avoid admitting that someone is gone. The auction violence, the decades-long vigils, the mother burning her hands to rescue a photograph from the fire, none of it is forced by the ghosts. The dead are present, even gentle. Tianqi's final message is not a demand, but a release. It's okay, Mime. The predation comes from the ones still breathing, who cannot accept that release, who need the dead to stay present in order to feel that their own lives still matter. That's the context for Wenqi's lawn. She has not moved on. She has not healed. She's not even sure what she's waiting for, but she is no longer hungry in the way the neighborhood is hungry. She has stopped performing grief for a mother who could never see her, stopped running from a brother who never blamed her, stopped measuring her life against the space someone else left behind. The sprout pushes up through dead leaves, and she watches it without demanding that it mean anything. If you've been paying attention to how HOME works, you understand that's the first thing in the book that hasn't required consumption to exist. Jiang wrote Linghun partly from her experience of diaspora, that strange tug between cultures, between the person you were and the person you're becoming, between the home you left and the home that never quite arrives. The immigrant ache, she's noted, is its own kind of haunting. You carry the dead and the distant with you, and sometimes you can't tell whether that weight is memory or paralysis. The book's final image doesn't resolve that ache, but it does reposition it. Wenqi is carrying Liam's ashes, Huijia's letters, Tianqi's voice on a toy robot, and she is still sitting upright, awake, watching something grow. The story does not promise that she'll stand up and walk away. It doesn't promise that the second spirit at the window will be identified, or that her parents will ever see her, or that the neighborhood will stop waiting. It only shows us that she has, for the first time, chosen, not dragged, not coerced, not hiding. The girl who once screamed "I'm alive" at a mother who couldn't hear her is now sitting in silence, requiring nothing from anyone, letting the dead be dead and the grass be grass. That's not a happy ending. Zhang has said plainly, not everyone heals and not everyone decides to. The warning at the core of this book is that entire lives can be spent waiting for a knock at the door that never comes. Huijia waited 40 years. Wenqi's mother is still waiting. The lawns of HOME are still full, but the sprout pushes through anyway, indifferent to whether anyone understands it. The book doesn't tell you what to do with your dead. It only shows you what it looks like when someone stops trying to keep them alive at the cost of her own.